Hello Internet and welcome to this day in history for the 4th of November. Where are we today? Well, we go back a somewhat short time this time, to 1956. We are in fact going to Hungary, because it was on this day in 1956 that the Soviets decided to crush the Hungarian rebellion by force and send its tanks and army troops into Hungary to restore peace and Soviet communist rule. Of course, with such militarily superior forces, this was achieved in fairly short order. The student-inspired revolution, if you can call it that, against communist and Soviet indirect rule had been going on for a few weeks at this point, and at first the Soviets had at least indicated that they had been willing to negotiate a settlement, but eventually the Politburo changed its mind. This was also at the time where Khrushchev was new in power, and he probably needed to cement his position as not seeming completely weak, and sent their tanks into Hungary, into Prague, which crushed the uprising and returned Hungary to safe and secure pro-communist, pro-Soviet governance. So why is this so important? Well, it's important because it showed just exactly what the Soviet Union was willing to do to keep control of its vassal states. And yes, I'm using vassal states exactly for the reason you think I am, because that was literally what this proved that they were. It proved to the world once and for all that no, the Warsaw Pact was not a bunch of separate nations joining together for mutual benefit. This was literally the Soviet Empire, and everyone in it was going to be subject to Moscow and whoever ruled Moscow at any given time. It proved once and for all that the Soviet Union was, well, kind of the evil empire that Ronald Reagan would later call them. It had immense influence as well on the West, as long as firing, of course, the imagination of a lot of Western students and Western people, because such doomed student revolutions often does. It also created the final proof that communism was a bad thing in many people's minds. Communism was, of course, already to a certain degree demonized, but the educated classes and the intellectuals had always had a soft spot for the Soviet Union, and of course they had taken over from one of the most hardcore authoritarian regimes of the European continent in even pre-modern times, namely the Russian Tsars. But even after this, while the Soviet Union of course kept its defenders and kept its advocates in the West, this was a watershed moment for, shall we call it, public support of the Soviet Union. That had of course already been falling rapidly in the years after the Second World War, but the Hungarian rebellion was where people could see at least once and for all, yes, these people that governs the Soviet Union are probably evil. No, they are not going to allow you to live in peace. Yes, they are going to try to kill the crap out of you if you don't do what they say. And this was in many ways the moment, combined of course with what happened in Czechoslovakia 12 years later, that really caused the stiffening of the Western spine of the Western populations, if you want to call it that, that allowed the West to truly stand up to the Soviet Union without any real worry that the population would go against the ruling anti-communist governments. So yes, in that way, the Soviet Union, while maintaining control of its empire, in a certain degree shot itself in the foot as it stiffened resistance, passive and ideological resistance to it all over the world for the foreseeable future. Anyway, this day in history for the 4th of November, Soviet sends its tanks into Hungary to crush the rebellion in 1956. I hope this has been of interest to you. Until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.